How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. It's lovely to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you too. My name is Emily Joe. I am one of SASH's interns for the summer. And if we could start out, could you please tell me a little bit about yourself and your practice?
Sure. So I'm Daniel Tehrani. I'm a psychotherapist at the SAP Project in New York City. We're a clinic that really focuses on out of control sexual behavior. And in terms of my practice, I work primarily with queer people. I myself am a gay man and a person of color. So that's a big majority of the community that I serve. It's the community that I belong to as well. And the work that I do is about increasing my clients' capacity for intimacy, for healthy, meaningful sex, but also to address mental health issues, depression, anxiety, all of that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's such important work. And I feel like the fact that you're also a member of the community gives you such important insight that you can bring to those conversations with your clientele. Do you have any specific people or like moments that inspired you to start this work?
Yeah, I thought about this question, and what it made me realize is that it was really the 2016 election that made me decide to become a social worker and a psychotherapist. I was seeing ignorance, cruelty, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia, racism, bigotry in general. I saw it being televised on TV, normalized in a way. Of course, it's always existed, but there was a really dark shift in 2016. And as a community member, I couldn't just sit by. At the time, I was getting an MFA in creative writing from Columbia. I was gearing up towards becoming an academic. Interestingly enough, what I was hoping to do with my life was become a queer lit professor, but I couldn't do. I knew I had to have a much more active role, and that I had to kind of support and equip my community with tools. If the world was going to get darker, if it was going to feel more and more perilous for marginalized people, for queer people, for people of color, for trans folk, non-binary folk, then I had to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting because I kind of work in these like social justice adjacent spaces and just graduated from GW studying international affairs. And so many people have such similar like sentiments to yours about the impact that the 2016 election had on their kind of career trajectories and passions and the work that they wanted to do like within their communities. So I think that that's maybe like a generational thing or like just something that's really resonant for me too. Do you have any people that you feel like inspire you now within your work, whether it's your clients or academics or people who you work with? Like,
oh yeah, I mean, when I was younger, when I was first starting out in college, I was really inspired by Judith Butler, by Edward Said, by these people who were approaching sociological issues in this academic way. But once I started to look at these issues in a clinical way, I really find myself, of course, being inspired by activists, by Marsha P. Johnson, by all of the people that were involved in Stonewall. I was just, sharing about my experience with the 2016 election, which, it was really inspired by my rage. I was angry. And the Stonewall riots were what caused the queer liberation movement to happen. It takes rage to end anger and setting boundaries and saying no to get things done. So I'm inspired by my clients who are similarly trying to set boundaries, trying to change their lives, holding on to hope, having hope, and incredibly resilient. One thing in my practice that I always talk about is queer rage and how it can be used to transform your life. So whenever I see my clients actively doing that, I'm very inspired by that.
Yeah, I love that because I obviously know the story of Stonewall and kind of how Marsha Free Johnson wasn't credited for her active role in it for a really long time, but I haven't thought about it in the framework of the power of queer rage. And I think that that's such a cool tool for you to kind of introduce people to and talk about and just like harness. Like, I love that.
My queer rage is what made me a psychotherapist. And so with my clients, what I hear all the time with my clients is that they're like, I'm frustrated at this. And I'm always like, why can't you just be angry? Why does it have to be anger light? Why does it have to be diet anger? Why can't you have your full blown anger and rage? Why can't it be a healthy, transformative thing for you?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think that the power behind that is really, I don't know, just transformative, honestly.
Sure.
Do you have anything that you wish you knew when you started out as a clinician?
Yeah, absolutely. When I started out, because I am a community member, because my clients really are my peers, I feel so compelled to help. I feel so compelled, especially when I first started out. I was like, I want to give interventions and I want to facilitate these like major changes right now, immediately, now, let's go. I was so impatient. But that's not how it works. That is not at all how it works. It doesn't matter how much you want to change things. The client has to be ready, and that takes time and patience and compassion. And that's something that I learned. It's something that I only learned through practicing this work.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. I think that I sometimes have that tendency to want things to happen more quickly than maybe is realistic. And that's a good advice to hear, I think. Is there one thing that you feel like you used as a student or that you learned maybe from your background in creative writing that you continue to use within your practice today?
A supervisor once told me that when a client asks you a really direct question, that first you don't have to answer. If they're like, "What did you eat for lunch today?" or "When did you lose your virginity?" or something like that. If they ask you something super personal that you may not want to answer, you can always say to them, "What do you imagine?"
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah, and that allows the question to be put back onto them. So it's back onto being about them, but also it offers the ability to open up into their psyche and their world and how they perceive you. What is their transference? How do they feel about you? Are they anxious about something? Are they scared about something? Do they want to, what is it that they're feeling in their connection with you? My work as a therapist is very relational. So I will say to my clients when they ask me something very direct, I'll say, I will answer you, but first I want to know, what do you imagine? And then of course I answer if I want to, if I consent to answering that very personal question.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that is definitely a great lesson kind of that can be used for people who don't really know how to respond in those situations. Okay, now to kind of pivot into the LGBTQIA panel and your work as a panelist at the conference. How do you feel like the panel and just the general topic of LGBTQIA health is important to sexual health as a whole?
I think every clinician should be prepared in how to successfully be there for their queer LGBTQIA clients when it comes to their sexuality. Because for queer people, our sexuality is one of the most wonderful, liberating, and freeing things that we have. And it can be so just beneficial to our lives. But it's also the place that society has placed shame and stigma upon us. So this has to be, managed, taken care of. Like, as much opportunity for joy as there is in queer sexuality, there's also a lot of opportunity for despair, shame, self-loathing, and behaviors that are really, really self-harming as well. I work at the SAP project. We see a lot of clients who experience out of control sexual behavior. They're managing internalized homophobia, stigma, internalized transphobia, and it's coming out through their sexuality. So I think every clinician should be equipped to support healthy queer sex, but also to be able to heal wounds around queer sexuality.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that we have been talking a lot on our end about getting the message out that these conversations are relevant for every clinician, not just those who specialize in affirming queer identity, because that the piece that you said of being equipped to have those conversations and look into that internalized homophobia is just just essential regardless of who your client base is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't imagine anyone's practice being fully just straight people.
Yeah.
I can't imagine having a full practice of like 25 to 35 people and not having at least one queer client who needs support on their sexuality.
Absolutely. No, yeah. Definitely. Okay. And then to kind of pivot to something similar, when you created the presentation or when you think about what you plan to talk about at the panel, do you have a specific type of client that you keep in mind when giving this type of informational kind of presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. First, you know, I know that intersectionality is something that people are talking about. It's something the universe handed to me upon birth. I am a Jewish Iranian gay man who grew up during 9/11. It was very complex, very intersectional. So it's something that I learned by trial by fire, and it's something that not every clinician has a deep understanding for, although I'm sure most want to have an understanding of identities that are complicated and multifaceted. So I think that's kind of what I can offer, but also in terms of like the clients that I can speak about, like I have clients who represent many, many multifaceted identities, and they're complicated. They don't all fit together very neatly. And so that's one thing. But also the little things that I've learned from my clients' resilience when it comes to what they've survived. I have a client who, despite all of the things that he's been through, he has this mantra that he created for himself when he was in his early 20s, that you should just dance into it. Just dance into it, which I think is a deeply, deeply queer way of seeing one's resistance and one's survival. We invented disco. We invented house music. The things that make us queer are that we dance into things, that we are faced with oftentimes insurmountable odds, but we find a way to not only survive, but to do it with wit and grace. And many of us make the world more beautiful, more creative, and more fun.
Mm-hmm.
That's the queer experience, and I want to share it.
I love the just dance into it. I think that's also just so powerful and kind of encapsulates everything that we've been talking about. Okay, well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I am so excited for the panel. It's going to be so great.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for this. I'm so happy to be involved, and thanks again.
Of course, we're so happy to have you involved. I hope you have a great day.
You too. Take care. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.